the Prime Minister has just come out on the balcony of the Ministry of Health in the floodlights.
The summer of 1945 was, of course, a wonderfully exciting period altogether. We'd just won the war, we'd beaten the bloody fascists.
And Mr. Bevin is calling for silence because Mr. Attlee is going to speak.
We'd just won a great victory, a Labour victory won by the Labour Party up and down the country. We really thought the whole world was going to be changed.
But I want to remind you all, we have to turn to work to win the peace as we've won the war.
Not many people thought that the Labour Party was going to win, and among the people who didn't think there was going to be such a victory were the leaders of the Labour Party, Attlee and Bevin. But they didn't appreciate the change of mood which was happening up and down the country, which people like Aneurin Bevan, he'd been up and down helping to change the mood. So us outside, we had a better understanding, as very often happens, than the people right on the inside. But it was a very curious situation, because the two biggest figures in the Labour Party, they wanted Churchill to carry on for a few months more longer, but they were put out the scruff of their necks, I say in my book on Aneurin Bevan. We had to take our leaders with us. Well, that's a very good thing.
Things are not going to be easy all at once. We and you, I know, will do our best, but we can't do the impossible.
Both Attlee and Bevin, of course, appreciated the victory and were out to make the best of it. When we got in, things happened a bit more slowly than might have been expected, but nothing could diminish the scale of a great victory, one of the greatest victories in British political history. It was the Labour Party itself which had won the election, and we'd won it on a very good programme. And we had a top-class cabinet to carry it into effect. 5 or 6 of those, were amongst the most brilliant politicians of the century.
The Labour Party's great victory shows that the country is ready for a new policy.
On the day after the election, Herbert Morrison tried to stop Attlee going to the palace to take over the government, because he thought that he should be doing that job. There ought to be a special party meeting at which he would win the vote. But it was Attlee who had led us in the election, and Ernest Bevin had been his chief supporter and determined to keep Attlee there. And when he heard of what was afoot by Morrison, he put a stop to it, and that was just another sign of the alliance between Bevin and Attlee, and it was those two together who really were the leaders, the Prime Minister of the country. Attlee without Bevin wouldn't have been anything the same, but Bevin gave full support to Attlee. Because some of the things we did as a government, of course, were very good, but sometimes also individual ministers got under pressure when they were introducing things or doing things that appeared unpopular or difficult at the time. And when some of his individual ministers got into trouble, Attlee wouldn't come to their rescue, whether it was Aneurin Bevan or Shinwell or Strachey. Any of those who got into trouble, they didn't get the kind of support that Tony Blair gives to his ministers now. 90% of the press was Tory, and they could be vicious, especially vicious against Aneurin Bevan and the left-wing members of the cabinet. And Aneurin Bevan said it was the most prostituted press in the world, and that prostituted press was at its prostituted worst during that period. And so at the time of the foundation of the National Health Service, the Tory newspapers and the Tory leader, Winston Churchill, they were out to destroy Aneurin Bevan. Churchill wanted revenge for what he claimed Aneurin Bevan had done to him in the war. Sometimes people say Churchill could be magnanimous. Well, it was true, but he wasn't magnanimous towards Nye. He was out to kill him. He thought that if he could destroy Aneurin Bevan, he would destroy the Labour government as well, and maybe that was a true idea, and so he absolutely went for Nye and called him the Minister of Disease, which was scandalous. Nye had to conduct his own defence, which, however, of course, he did very well. He gave the full statistics of how much healthier the British people were in 1948 than they had been under Churchill when he was minister way back in the 1920s.
Most of the shortcomings which have been revealed by the British Health Service are not the result of the intrinsic defects of the service itself, but because of the overwhelming volume of need that the service itself has revealed.
It saddens me because Attlee should have been making the defence of Nye, but he was so shaken by the charges that were made against Nye when Nye had accused all the Conservative voters of being lower than vermin. He'd used the word perfectly properly, but the failure to come to the support of his cabinet colleagues when they were under fire from the Tory press is my worst criticism of Clem Attlee.
The Labour Party is in fact the one party which most nearly reflects in its representation and composition all the main streams which flow into the great river of our national life.
Attlee's had the advantage of the success of the government, and nobody was challenging him in the leadership until he himself retired from it, 55, and it was then that arguments about the successor happened. Herbert Morrison thought he should have succeeded to the leadership, but the people who'd had most of the votes in the party leadership had already transferred to Hugh Gaitskell. That's how he got the leadership. But he appeared to many of us to be much more interested in maintaining the American alliance and doing what the Americans thought was necessary in order to maintain that alliance than he was in what was the right way for the Labour Party to conduct its affairs in Britain. And so we had one election, 55, which unfortunately we lost. Nonetheless, after that, after our defeat of 55, so eager were the Labour Party and indeed Nye and Bevan and the others to have a party that would be back in government, not just for the sake of government, but for the sake of the world situation. We always thought it was much better to have a Labour government to do it than these damn Tories who didn't have any kind of idea of doing it properly. And so there was a reconciliation between Nye and Gaitskell, but unfortunately the reconciliation between them was not sufficient to win the 1959 election, and so we were all deeply disappointed.
Weigh deeply all the issues in the election. Think over the whole of the past 5 years, or if you can bear it, the whole 13 years.
When Harold Wilson was elected leader of the Labour Party in 1960, I was the member for Ebbw Vale, Nye's old constituency. Nye had died of cancer, most tragically, and I had lost the Devonport constituency. He had actually talked to me during his illness of my possibly succeeding to Ebbw Vale, but I told him nonsense, he was going to recover. Tragically, he didn't. He was my closest friend and, in my view, the greatest socialist leader in our country of the century.